Hi, my name is Nilesh Gule. I work as an enterprise architect for a leading bank here in Singapore. Put the social media handles for all my platforms where I'm available. I'm also co-organizer for Azure Singapore user group. So if you're interested in topics around Azure, you can look out for my LinkedIn post around this. I also like the game of cricket, and like most Indians, they love the game of cricket. I'm not an exception to that. If any one of you is willing to talk about the ongoing IPL or upcoming World Cup, we can talk about it later after the event. Uh, yeah, I see Muthu raising his hand there. So a bit of background about myself. I was born and brought up in this small place called as Goa, which is on the western side of India. If you don't know about the demographics of India, I've highlighted it over there. It's about 40 minutes of flight from Mumbai. And it has a distinct culture, architecture style, which is different from rest of India because Goa was a Portuguese colony and Portuguese ruled Goa even after India was liberated for about 14 years. The reason I'm talking about Goa is it forms a very central part of my talk. When COVID ended in Feb 2022 or around Feb 2022, I was stuck in Singapore like many others for 3 years. I wanted to go back, travel, meet my parents after 3 years. And I want to share an experience with you about airline. I use this budget airlines to book the ticket, and when I tried to do it using mobile, it failed. They have a mobile app which is supposed to be functioning, but when I started looking for flights, routes which I wanted to travel, I didn't get anything. It was not functioning. So I dropped them an email or help saying it's not working. They acknowledge saying, yeah, we know it's not working. We will raise a query or we'll raise a ticket for our help desk and they will try to fix it. Then I went onto the website and things worked. There were still some problems, but I managed to work around. I managed to book the ticket and I was able to travel. The thing is, even when I was using the website, the things like error messages, it was different. For the same kind of operation that I was doing, let's say I was looking for a route to travel to Goa from one of the cities in India. I can't travel directly from Singapore to Goa. I have to go to one of the bigger cities like Mumbai, Bangalore, Chennai, and then I have to take a connecting flight. So when I'm looking for these connecting routes, the error messages that I was getting in mobile and the website was completely different. So what we can infer from this is, again, I have not done a root cause analysis, but my guess is they're not using APIs here. The teams which are managing the mobile app and the websites, possibly they are completely different teams and they have no coordination between themselves. So if you look at the end user experience, me as a customer trying to book an airline ticket for the same airline using 2 different channels, it's not a very good experience. But somehow I managed to travel. That was the happy part. And now it's again, the time is for me to travel next month. So based on that feedback which I gave, how many of you think that this particular airline would have improved? What's your gut feeling? Let's say, raise a hand, show of hands. Okay. Many of you are shaking the heads. So that's correct. The situation remains the same. So still, I can't use their mobile app. I still have to go through the website to do the booking. But this time I'm traveling with my family. So I thought of using, loyalty points. I've been using this airlines quite frequently because if we look at all the constraints that I have for travel, they offer me the best value proposition in terms of I'm traveling with 2 kids, young kids. If you have kids, you know that it's not so easy to travel with kids. So given all these constraints, they give me the best value proposition, and that is why I still stick with them. So this time, I thought of using the social media because brands, they are quite conscious about social media. I used their Twitter handle, and I said, okay, I'm having a problem. I try to use my loyalty login. I got to a point where they gave me email ID or mobile 2-factor authentication, but nothing happened. A page opened up blank. Like they're supposed to give me OTP, a blank page comes, I can't do anything with that. So I went on Twitter. I got a response immediately within 1 hour saying, yeah, we acknowledge. Just drop us your email ID or whatever you are trying to use. We will see. And the response is, give us 96 hours to reset your password. It's like 4 days just to reset the password. It's like what kind of world we are living in. We are in 2023. I can't wait for my Uber car or my foodpanda driver for 45 minutes to deliver my food. And here I'm trying to reset a password which takes 4 days. So at this point, I had almost given up on them. I don't want to use my loyalty points or anything like that. One thing I can assume here is they're using some legacy systems. One of the reasons why it could take them 4 days to just reset a password is probably they are using some system which is very old, which is not able to handle these kind of requirements. So how can we make sure that we don't end up in similar situation? Now, some of you might recognize this person. Anyone is familiar with this face? Not Steve Ballmer. He's the CEO of Nokia. Now, when Microsoft acquired Nokia in 2016, at his last speech to the employees, he was seen crying. And he said something, we didn't do anything wrong, but somehow we lost. In fact, I have a very emotional attachment to Nokia. Nokia was my first phone. When I got the mobile phone, it was my first phone. When I got engaged and I gave a present to my wife, it was also a Nokia phone. So it was bad for me to see Nokia going down like this. But then, if you look at the history of Nokia, when Apple came up with smartphones, somehow Nokia didn't catch up. It was still a useful phone. You could still make a call, you could still send SMS. But if you look at the end user proposition, it doesn't serve the purpose that a smartphone offers. And that's probably one reason why Nokia lost. So how can we make sure we don't end up in a similar situation when we are building systems, when we are designing systems? So I would start with some of the basic principles or best practices. You might have seen this. This is called as the 12-factor apps. In 2011, some of the engineers from Heroku, they published these principles, which is to give set of guidelines for applications who want to build portable apps and deploy portable apps. This was based on the experience of Heroku engineers deploying thousands of apps into their environments. So it talks about having single code base dependencies, then having externalized config files, backing services, so on and so forth. So if you follow this, you can be sure that you will have a decent portable app which can be deployed. But this was, again, back in 2011. Since then, we have had things like Docker. Kubernetes has become like a almost de facto orchestration platform. We have microservices, we have cloud adoption. So some of these things, they are not exactly relevant now, or they need to be adjusted a little bit. And that's where in 2016, a guy called Kevin Hoffman, he published a paper with O'Reilly, or a small book. It's called Beyond 12-Factor Apps. And he added 3 more factors. And now it's called as the 15-factor app. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, someone also proposed 16 or 17 factors recently. But we'll stick to 15. And the 3 new factors are API first, telemetry, and authentication. The topic around authentication and authorization, I think it's so vast that it's beyond 20 minutes discussion, so I'll skip it for time being. This is where things like defense in depth and your zero trust security comes into the picture. We'll talk about the other 2. API first. API first talks about defining a service contract and using it for all your development. It's mainly suited for cloud. Nowadays, whether we like it or not, we are using APIs. Just look at around ourselves. How many of us carry like credit cards in our pocket? I usually don't carry. I stopped carrying credit cards. I have them in my wallet and the mobile app. I also have them on my smartphone. And we use instead of EasyLink, we use our smartphone to pay tickets. If we go outside Singapore, where digital adoption is not so much, it becomes a problem for me if someone asks, okay, you have to take out your card, reach out to the back pocket of your wallet, search for the card, give it to them, and then if it needs to be swiped again, that's another sort of burden nowadays for me. I have to enable the swipe. So I think APIs are everywhere. Unknowingly or knowingly, we are using them. And it's not just for the applications. The smart devices are a common example where APIs are becoming popular. We have things like refrigerators as well, now able to communicate using IoT and other stuff. So these really help us in making rapid prototypes. They also help us in work in parallel. So we can use things like virtualization. Even if the API is not ready, the teams can work independently, and that can help us to go quicker in the market. The other thing is telemetry. Historically, if we look at the way we were gathering data from systems, it was more like based on the resource usage. We would monitor CPU, RAM, hard disk usage, and we would build our monitoring around that. But with microservices and with things moving to cloud and platform as service or on the others' platforms, like other people's infrastructure, we lose that control. And we need something which can tell us what exactly happened over a transaction. So if we look at this particular diagram here, there is a checkout happening, and it goes through multiple services. There is a card service, there is a checkout service, which is again interacting with the external payment service. Now assume that many of us are in banks. So in banks, we use third-party products, and then we might build services around that to integrate with that product. We might be able to scale our services, but then the product that we use might be having some performance issues. How do we identify and locate those problems? That is where we need things like telemetry. And telemetry, it's not just about application performance monitoring. We also need domain-specific telemetry and health and the system logs. So this really helps us to monitor this, and I saw that there are a couple of sessions in the API days itself, which talks about observability and things around that. So hopefully you will find it more useful attending those sessions when it comes to telemetry. Now, along with this, we also need frameworks and tools. So if you are, let's say, from Java background, you might know that Spring Boot offers a very opinionated way of developing web applications, microservices. That's one way of doing it. Or that's one of the popular framework which is used for building microservices and that kind of architecture. Here I have another example of a tool which is called as, it's an open source project called Dapper, which allows us to build modern application. And it provides these cross-cutting services or components like service-to-service invocation, state management. When it comes to the messaging pub-sub mechanism, it has components for that. And it has SDKs for various programming languages, starting with Go, Node, Python, Java, .NET. And if there is no SDK available, we could still use Dapper in any scenario where there is a HTTP API or gRPC API. So as long as your programming language can call HTTP or gRPC API, Dapper can help there. And in terms of deployment, it supports multiple deployment models. It is designed or built for microservices kind of architecture or application, but we can also make it work on those applications which are not using microservices. So this way, it can make our application very adaptable. We can build it sort of once and deploy it to any environment. These are the different Dapper components which are there. There are like state store, pub-sub mechanism, and in each of those sections, you have multiple supported components. So let's say secret management, for example. We have AWS Secret Manager, Azure Key Vault. So let's assume that you are a SaaS company who is building products which can be deployed on any cloud, and you want to switch from, or your client wants to switch from AWS to Azure. Instead of writing code which is using specific SDKs from AWS or Azure, here you can use Dapper and you write code once, and just by changing the configuration, you can deploy that application to any of these supported platforms. Now, there are some things which we need to be careful or we can use in terms to improve the resiliency and adaptability of our applications, assuming that we followed all the previous things that I talked about. So we can start with building loosely coupled applications. This is where microservices and event-driven architectures help us to decouple the applications. And there was, I think, a workshop on event-driven architecture or how to do event-driven systems. Then there is automation. And automation is using everything as code. I have just mentioned infrastructure as code here, and things like using declarative methods, using Terraform or Ansible or Pulumi, these kind of tools, which can help us to put everything that we are building as infrastructure in source control. We can have a trace of whatever happens, not just for the application code, but also for our infra. Then there is testing part, where we can use chaos testing. Netflix made this chaos monkey popular, and it's a way of deliberately introducing faults into the system to test. Let's say we are having a Kubernetes-based environment, and we have 5 replicas of our application running. We can use chaos testing to kill 3 pods or 3 replicas and see how does the application behave. Or if we go and delete one of the worker nodes for Kubernetes, we can see how does it impact the application. So those kind of things can be tested using chaos testing. Then on the delivery side, we can look at progressive delivery. We don't want to have downtime for our application. So there are ways and means like blue-green deployment. We have the canary releases. We have dark launches or phase releases like alpha, beta, gamma kind of approach to release software, where we can reduce the blast radius and we can have testing done with real users, but on a small subset, so that it doesn't impact the overall user base. And we also can look at serverless. Serverless, it doesn't only mean function as a service or fast, or let's say AWS Lambda or Azure Functions. Nowadays, we also have databases which offer serverless, like Aurora has serverless offering. Azure Synapse also has serverless offering. So serverless is another way which can help us to build a resilient system and to reduce cost and to make optimal use of the resources. And last but not the least, it's the observability again. So using this, I think we can build systems which are highly resilient, highly observable, and also adaptable. And if we do this, it's again not going to be a straightforward journey. I was just going through LinkedIn post by ByteByteGo yesterday. And this talks about the evolution of Netflix, how they moved from a monolithic-based system to a microservices, but not, again, just pure microservices. You can see on the right side here, where they talk about gateway aggregation layer. And even further, we have the federated gateway. So once we start going into this kind of architecture, we will see that we start with maybe monolith, then go into microservices, then we have to evolve into the next step. And it is going to be an evolutionary process. And I think that's pretty much the last slide of my presentation. Here are some references to the things that I talked about. And in case you are interested to refer to the slides, they are published on SlideShare and Speaker Deck. That's pretty much from my side. Thank you.